The clock struck midnight, and the room fell silent, eerily so. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by a flickering candle that seemed too fragile to keep the darkness at bay. A chilling breeze swept through the room, though no windows were open. Then, out of nowhere, a whisper, "It's not over yet." Jonas sat bolt upright, his translucent form barely visible against the dim light. He wasn't supposed to be here, not anymore. He had crossed the veil, or so he thought, but something was holding him back. Panic gripped him as he realized he could still see the old wooden floor beneath him. "What's going on? Why am I still here?" he muttered, his voice echoing faintly, as though carried on the wind. Jonas wasn't always this restless spirit. In life, he had been a charming but reckless man, a dreamer with big plans but little follow-through. Born in the bustling city of Oldridge in the 1850s, he'd grown up amidst the hum of horse-drawn carriages and the scent of freshly baked bread wafting from street vendors. But Jonas had always felt the weight of unmet potential. He was the kind of man who made promises to everyone, including himself, but rarely kept them. His friends called him the eternal optimist, but deep down, Jonas knew optimism couldn't fix his failures. He had loved, too, oh, how he had loved. Margot, with her auburn hair and laugh that could light up the gloomiest day, had been his anchor. But Jonas's inability to commit, his endless procrastination, had driven a wedge between them. When Margot left for a new life in another town, Jonas swore he'd change. He just never got the chance. Now, here he was, trapped between the living and the dead. The room he found himself in was familiar but faded, like an old photograph. It was his childhood home, though its once vibrant wallpaper now peeled at the edges, and dust coated every surface. A large grandfather clock stood in the corner, its pendulum swinging with an ominous click-clack. Before Jonas could piece together the mystery of his presence, a sound startled him, a deep, resonating voice. "Jonas Everly, you have been given one final chance." "Who's there?" Jonas spun around, his translucent form shimmering. The voice seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was neither man nor woman but something in between, a glowing entity with eyes like embers and a commanding presence. "I am your guide. You may call me Salas." Jonas blinked. "Guide? Guide to what?" Salas stepped closer, their voice calm yet firm. "You left many things unfinished, Jonas. Promises made but not kept. Lives touched but not fulfilled. Your spirit cannot move on until you right at least one of your greatest wrongs." Jonas scoffed, though unease bubbled beneath his bravado. "I don't even know where to start. Do you have a list or something?" Salas didn't laugh. Instead, they raised a hand, and the room filled with a warm, golden light. Images began to swirl in the air, snapshots of Jonas's life. There was Margot, her tear-streaked face as she boarded a train. Then a young boy Jonas had once promised to mentor, left waiting on the steps of a library that Jonas never arrived at. Finally, there was his mother, frail and bedridden, clutching a letter Jonas had meant to send but never did. Jonas swallowed hard. "Okay, so maybe I wasn't perfect." "You have 48 hours, Salas said, their tone unyielding. "One task. One life-changing action. Fail, and you will remain in this limbo forever." The words hit Jonas like a punch to the gut. "Forever," he exclaimed, his voice cracking. "You mean I'll never get to move on? Never find peace?" Salas nodded gravely. "Time is already ticking." Jonas's mind raced. He didn't even know where to begin. Should he find Margot? Apologize to the boy? Write the letter to his mother? The weight of it all pressed down on him, suffocating yet intangible. The setting outside his old home was no less haunting. Oldridge, once lively and bustling, now seemed frozen in time. The streets were empty, save for the occasional wisp of fog curling around the lampposts. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant tolling of a church bell. Jonas felt a pang of nostalgia as he wandered the streets he used to know so well. But there was no time for sentimentality. He needed a plan. His thoughts kept circling back to Margot. She had been his greatest regret, his deepest wound. If I can find her, if I can tell her I'm sorry, maybe that's enough, he whispered, as though convincing himself. Yet doubt lingered. What if she didn't want to see him? What if she had moved on, forgotten him entirely? Jonas shook his head, trying to banish the negative thoughts. No. I have to try. I have to do something. As the first hours of his quest slipped away, Jonas felt the weight of Salas's warning more than ever. The clock was ticking, and for the first time in his life, or afterlife, he couldn't afford to waste a single moment. The 48-hour countdown had begun, and Jonas's chance to escape eternal limbo depended on his ability to confront the ghosts of his past. But as he set out on his journey, he couldn't shake the feeling that this task would be more than just life-changing, it would be soul-defining. Jonas drifted through the fog-shrouded streets of Aldridge, each step filled with the weight of his dilemma. The 48-hour deadline loomed in his mind like a storm cloud, and his thoughts circled endlessly around Margot. What would he even say to her after all these years? Could an apology undo the hurt he'd caused? As he neared the train station, the last place he had seen her, a strange sound caught his attention. It was faint at first, like the whisper of leaves brushing against cobblestones. But as Jonas turned the corner, the sound grew louder, a muffled cry. He froze. Hello? His voice wavered, unsure if he truly wanted an answer. The crying continued, desperate and raw, pulling him forward despite his unease. Near the shadow of an abandoned carriage, he saw her, a young girl, no older than 8, huddled against the steps of a boarded-up shop. She clutched a worn doll to her chest, her tear-streaked face hidden beneath tangled brown hair. Jonas approached cautiously. Hey, are you okay? The girl's head shot up, her wide, terrified eyes locking onto his translucent form. Why, you're not real, she stammered, scrambling back. Jonas raised his hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture. I know I look strange, but I'm not here to hurt you. What's your name? She hesitated, eyeing him warily. Clara. Okay, Clara, Jonas said gently, kneeling to her level. What are you doing out here all alone? Tears welled up in her eyes again. I'm lost. I can't find my brother, and he's the only family I have left. Jonas felt a pang in his chest, a strange sensation for someone without a beating heart. Your brother? What happened? Clara clutched her doll tighter. We were running from the fire. It was so big, and there was so much smoke. He told me to hide, but when I came out, he was gone. I've been looking everywhere. A fire? Jonas glanced around, noticing the faint scent of ash lingering in the air. The streets seemed eerily deserted, as if the entire town had fled. I'll help you find him, Jonas said without hesitation. Clara's eyes widened. You will? Yes, he said firmly. I might not be alive, but I can still help. For the first time, Clara gave him a hesitant smile. As they moved through the empty streets, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that fate had placed Clara in his path for a reason. Was this the task Salas had mentioned? Helping Clara reunite with her brother seemed noble enough, but it didn't feel like it addressed the regrets of his own life. What does your brother look like? Jonas asked, trying to focus on the immediate problem. He's tall, Clara said, holding her hand above her head. And he has dark hair. His name is Henry. Jonas nodded, keeping an eye out for any sign of movement. The fog thickened as they approached the edge of town, where charred remains of buildings stood like skeletal reminders of the fire. The acrid smell grew stronger, and Clara began to cough. Stay close, Jonas said, shielding her as best he could. Suddenly, a sound pierced the air, a faint, rhythmic banging. Jonas stopped in his tracks, listening intently. What is that? Clara asked, clutching his sleeve. I don't know, Jonas admitted, but his gut told him it was important. Let's check it out. They followed the sound to a partially collapsed house. The roof had caved in, and flames had scorched the walls black, but the banging continued, a steady, desperate rhythm. Henry! Clara called, her voice trembling with hope. Clara, a muffled voice responded. Jonas felt a surge of relief. He's in there. But as he examined the wreckage, his relief turned to dread. The front door was blocked by debris, and the structure looked unstable. Stay back, Jonas told Clara. No! I have to see him. Jonas knelt down, placing a hand on her shoulder. Listen, I can get to him. I don't have a body, remember? If something collapses, it won't hurt me. But you need to stay safe. Clara bit her lip, tears spilling over, but she nodded. Please bring him back. Jonas passed through the debris with ease, his ghostly form slipping between beams and rubble. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, and the heat was almost unbearable, even for someone who wasn't alive. Henry! Jonas called. Here! The voice came from a corner of the room, where a young man was pinned beneath a fallen beam. He looked bruised but alive, his face lighting up with relief when he saw Jonas. You're not human, Henry said, his voice hoarse. No time for that. Jonas replied, inspecting the beam. Can you move at all? Henry shook his head. Not without help. Jonas gritted his teeth. If he were alive, he could lift the beam, but as a spirit, he had no physical strength. Desperation clawed at him. How could he save Henry when he couldn't even touch the beam? Then he remembered Clara. She was small but strong-willed, and with the right leverage, they might have a chance. Jonas phased back through the rubble. Clara, listen to me. Your brother's trapped, but we can save him together. I need you to be brave. Clara's face was pale, but she nodded. What do I have to do? Jonas found a long plank among the debris and showed Clara where to place it under the beam. Together, they pushed with all their might, the beam groaning in protest before finally shifting enough for Henry to crawl free. As he emerged, Clara threw her arms around him, sobbing with relief. I thought I lost you. Henry hugged her tightly, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry, Clara. I promised I'd protect you. Watching their reunion, Jonas felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. He had helped them, but the ache of his own unfinished business remained. Thank you, Henry said, turning to Jonas. We couldn't have done it without you. Jonas smiled faintly. Just take care of each other, okay? As the siblings walked away, Jonas felt a shift in the air. Salas's voice echoed in his mind. This was not your task, Jonas. But it was a step forward. Jonas sighed. His time was running out, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. If he could help Clara and Henry, maybe, just maybe, he could make things right with Margot, too. With renewed determination, he turned toward the horizon, ready to face whatever came next. The clock was still ticking, but Jonas was no longer the man, or ghost, who wasted time. Jonas trudged through the fog, his translucent form barely illuminated by the flickering glow of street lamps. The events with Clara and Henry had left him more determined than ever to complete his task. But as the seconds ticked away, the weight of uncertainty bore down on him. Where was Margot now? Would she even want to see him? And what if he failed to find her before time ran out? The streets grew quieter, the stillness punctuated only by the occasional howl of the wind. Jonas's surroundings felt unfamiliar, even though he had spent most of his life in Aldrich. The fire had changed the town, leaving scars of ash and debris in its wake. As he moved deeper into the ruins, a chill prickled his senses, a different kind of cold than he was used to. Suddenly, he felt it, a presence, dark and oppressive, lurking just beyond the edge of his perception. He turned sharply. Who's there? No answer. Only silence, thick and unnerving. Show yourself, Jonas demanded, his voice echoing through the empty street. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, its shape shifting and unnatural. Its eyes burned like coals, and its voice was a low, guttural rasp. Jonas Everly, still trying to undo a lifetime of mistakes, are you? Jonas's chest tightened. Who are you? The figure's grin twisted into something malevolent. Call me Revenant. I'm here to ensure you don't succeed. Jonas stepped back instinctively. Why? What do you want? Balance, Revenant hissed. For every soul that moves on, another must remain. If you succeed, I lose my claim on you. And I can't allow that. Jonas clenched his fists, though he knew they would do little good. I don't care what you want. I'm not staying here. Revenant let out a low, chilling laugh. We'll see about that. With a wave of its hand, the shadows around Jonas thickened, twisting and coiling like living things. Jonas darted back, his mind racing. The shadows lunged at him, tendrils reaching out like claws. Though they couldn't harm him physically, their touch sent waves of icy dread coursing through his being, threatening to sap his resolve. He ran. The streets blurred as he moved, his ghostly form passing through walls and fences in a desperate bid to escape. But the shadows followed, relentless and unyielding. Think, Jonas, think, he muttered to himself, scanning his surroundings for an idea. Ahead, he spotted an old church, its bell tower rising like a beacon. If there was any place that could ward off whatever Revenant was, it was there. Jonas surged forward, his incorporeal feet barely touching the ground. The church doors creaked as he pushed them open, the sound echoing in the hollow space within. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old wood and candle wax. Rays of moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. He turned, heart pounding, or at least, the ghostly memory of it. The shadows hesitated at the threshold, writhing and snapping as if repelled by the sacred space. Yeah, that's right. Stay out. Jonas shouted, his voice braver than he felt. For a moment, it seemed he was safe. But then, a soft voice broke the silence behind him. You shouldn't have come here. Jonas spun around, startled. Standing in the center of the church was a young woman, her pale face framed by long, dark hair. She wore a simple, tattered dress, and her eyes carried a sadness that pierced straight through Jonas. Who are you? He asked, wary but intrigued. My name is Alara, she said softly. I've been trapped here, like you. Jonas frowned. Trapped? You mean, you're a ghost too? Alara nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. I've been here for decades. This place keeps me safe from the darkness outside, but it's also my prison. Jonas felt a pang of sympathy. What's keeping you here? She hesitated before answering. The same thing that keeps you. Unfinished business. Jonas's curiosity deepened. What kind of unfinished business? Alara's lips quivered as if holding back tears. I lost my family in the fire, just like so many others. I promised my little brother I'd find him, but I failed. He's out there somewhere, and until I keep my promise, I can't move on. Jonas's resolve hardened. Then we'll help each other. I'll help you find your brother, and you can help me find Margot. Alara's eyes widened with a glimmer of hope. You'd do that? After everything you're facing? Of course, Jonas said firmly. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we can't fix our mistakes alone. The two spirits left the church together, the air between them filled with an unspoken understanding. Outside, the shadows still lingered, but their pursuit seemed to have weakened. As they moved through the ruins of Oldridge, Alara shared what she knew about her brother. His name was Peter. He was only 6 when the fire started. I remember holding his hand, but the smoke, it was so thick, I lost him in the chaos. Jonas nodded, his determination growing. We'll find him. I promise. Their search took them deeper into the heart of the town, where the destruction was most severe. Charred beams and crumbling stone littered the ground, and the faint scent of smoke still lingered in the air. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught Jonas's eye. "Elara, did you see that?" She nodded, her expression tense. "Over there." They followed the movement to an old well, its stones blackened by fire. Peering inside, they saw a faint glow, like a tiny ember burning in the darkness. "Peter?" Elara called, her voice trembling. The glow grew brighter, and a small, ghostly figure emerged from the well. It was a young boy, his face smudged with soot but unmistakably alive in spirit. "Elara," he cried, his voice filled with both joy and sorrow. Elara rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him. "Oh, Peter! I'm so sorry I lost you." Peter clung to her, tears streaming down his face. "I was so scared, but I knew you'd come for me." Jonas watched the reunion, a lump forming in his throat. It reminded him of Clara and Henry, of the promises he had failed to keep in life. But before he could dwell on his own regrets, the air grew cold again. Revenant's voice echoed through the ruins, low and menacing. "Touching, but this changes nothing. None of you will escape." Jonas stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We'll see about that." The shadows surged toward them, darker and more ferocious than before. Jonas and Elara braced themselves, the fight far from over. The shadows swirled and twisted, forming an impenetrable wall of darkness around Jonas, Elara, and Peter. Revenant's sinister laugh echoed through the ruins, its guttural tone vibrating in the very air. "You can't run anymore, Jonas." Revenant growled, its voice cold and final. "The clock is ticking, and you'll never find Margot in time. Surrender, and perhaps I'll be merciful." Jonas stood his ground, his translucent form flickering faintly in the oppressive energy. "Mercy? You wouldn't know mercy if it stared you in the face." Beside him, Elara clung to Peter, shielding him with her ghostly form. Her eyes darted to Jonas. "What do we do?" "It's too strong." Jonas's mind raced. The odds seemed impossible, but he couldn't give in. "Not now." "We stand together," he said firmly. "This thing thrives on fear and despair. We have to fight it." Revenant's form solidified from the shadows, a towering, grotesque figure with hollow eyes and jagged, claw-like hands. "Fight me? You pathetic wisp of a soul. You can't even touch me." Jonas gritted his teeth. "Maybe not, but I can outsmart you." The creature lunged, its shadowy claws slashing through the air. Jonas dodged, his ghostly body moving faster than he thought possible. The rubble of the ruins made the ground treacherous, but his incorporeal form allowed him to pass through obstacles effortlessly. "Elara, get Peter out of here!" Jonas shouted, his voice commanding despite the chaos. Elara hesitated, torn between her fear for Jonas and her need to protect her brother. "But... go!" Jonas bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'll hold it off." Elara nodded reluctantly, grabbing Peter's hand. "Come on, Peter. We have to move." Peter looked back, his small face etched with worry. "Don't let it get you." Jonas gave the boy a reassuring smile, though he felt far from confident. "I'll be fine. Just stay safe." As Elara and Peter disappeared into the fog, Revenant turned its glowing eyes toward them. "You think they can escape? Foolish. I'll find them once I'm done with you." Jonas stepped between Revenant and the fleeing siblings. "You'll have to go through me first." Revenant let out a guttural laugh, its massive form bearing down on Jonas. "That can be arranged." The battle began in earnest, the shadows around Revenant lashing out like living weapons. Jonas darted and weaved, dodging the onslaught with every ounce of agility he could muster. But he knew he couldn't keep this up forever. "Think, Jonas, think," he muttered under his breath, scanning the ruins for anything he could use to his advantage. His eyes landed on the bell tower of the old church in the distance. A plan began to form in his mind, a risky, desperate plan. Jonas taunted Revenant, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Is that all you've got? You're supposed to be some powerful spirit, but you can't even catch me. Revenant roared in fury, its massive form lunging forward. You insolent pest. Jonas led the creature toward the church, its towering bell tower rising like a beacon in the darkness. As he neared the entrance, he called out to the creature. Come on! Or are you too scared to face me in there? The insult hit its mark. Revenant howled, its shadowy form surging after him. Inside the church, Jonas phased through the debris, making his way to the bell tower. The heavy air seemed to press down on him, but he pushed forward, determined. Revenant followed, its dark presence filling the sacred space. You can't hide from me, Jonas. This place won't save you. Jonas reached the base of the bell tower and looked up at the rusted bell hanging precariously above. It was massive, its weight supported by ancient wooden beams that groaned under its burden. You're right, Jonas said, turning to face Revenant. This place won't save me. But it might destroy you. Revenant snarled, lunging toward him with outstretched claws. At the last second, Jonas dove to the side, phasing through the tower's wooden supports. Revenant's claws struck the beams, the impact sending a deafening crack through the air. The bell above groaned ominously, shifting in its cradle. What are you doing? Revenant roared, realizing too late what Jonas had planned. Jonas stood beneath the bell, his expression resolute. This is for everyone you've tormented. With a final, powerful roar, Revenant lashed out, but Jonas leaped upward, his ghostly form colliding with the weakened beams. The impact was enough to shatter them, and the bell came crashing down with a thunderous clang. Revenant screamed, its shadowy form writhing as the bell struck it, the sound reverberating through the church like a divine hammer. The darkness around Revenant dissolved, its form crumbling into nothingness. As the echoes of the bell faded, Jonas collapsed to his knees, exhaustion washing over him. The oppressive chill in the air was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. Jonas? Alara's voice called from the doorway. He turned to see her and Peter standing there, their faces filled with awe and relief. It's over, Jonas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Alara rushed to his side, her expression a mix of gratitude and concern. You did it. You saved us. Jonas shook his head. No. We saved each other. Peter approached, his small hand reaching out to Jonas. Thank you, the boy said softly. Jonas smiled faintly, his form flickering as his strength waned. He looked at Alara and Peter, the siblings reunited against all odds. He had helped them find closure, but his own journey wasn't over yet. Alara, he said, his voice tinged with urgency. You and Peter need to move on. Find peace. She hesitated, her eyes glistening with emotion. What about you? Jonas glanced at the faint light beginning to creep into the horizon. Time was running out. I still have something to do. But seeing you two safe, it's enough for now. Alara nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Thank you, Jonas. For everything. As they faded into the light, Jonas turned toward the ruins of Aldrich. The clock was still ticking, but his resolve burned brighter than ever. I'm coming, Margot, he whispered. With the dawn of a new day, Jonas set off toward the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. Jonas stood in the quiet aftermath, the ruins of Aldrich eerily still. The shattered bell lay where it had fallen, its surface scorched and blackened from its clash with Revenant. The oppressive darkness that had haunted the village was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt almost sacred. Jonas's translucent form flickered weakly, his energy spent. He leaned against a crumbling stone wall, staring at the faint light of dawn seeping through the cracks in the ruined church. The battle had been won, but his journey wasn't over. He heard a faint rustling behind him and turned to see Alara and Peter stepping cautiously into the church. They looked around, their expressions a mix of awe and sorrow. Jonas, Alara said softly, her voice trembling. Is it really over? Jonas nodded, though he felt far from victorious. Revenant is gone. For now, Aldridge is free. Peter clung to his sister's hand, his small face etched with worry. But, what about you? Aren't you free too? Jonas looked at the boy, his heart aching with the weight of unfinished business. Not yet, he admitted. There's still something I have to do. Someone I have to find. Alara stepped closer, her ghostly form shimmering faintly in the dim light. Margot? Jonas's gaze dropped to the ground, his emotions warring within him. Yes. I made a promise to her before he hesitated, the memory of his death still raw. Before all of this. I have to make things right. Alara reached out, her hand passing through Jonas's shoulder like a cool breeze. You've done so much already. You saved us, Jonas. You don't have to do this alone. Jonas shook his head. This is my burden to carry. But you and Peter, you've earned your peace. You don't need to stay here anymore. Peter tugged on his sister's arm, his voice small but insistent. Jonas, we can help you. Don't leave us behind. Jonas knelt before the boy, his transparent form flickering as he struggled to stay steady. You've already helped me more than you know, Peter. But you have a chance to move on, to be with your family. Don't waste it. Alara's eyes filled with tears that glistened like tiny stars. We won't forget you, Jonas. I promise. Jonas offered a faint smile. I won't forget you either. As the first rays of sunlight spilled into the ruins, a soft glow surrounded Alara and Peter. The light grew brighter, enveloping them in warmth and peace. Peter looked at Jonas one last time, his voice trembling. Goodbye, Jonas. I hope you find her. Jonas watched as they vanished into the light, their forms dissolving into shimmering particles. The church fell silent once more, but this time, it was a peaceful silence. For a moment, Jonas allowed himself to grieve. He hadn't known Alara and Peter for long, but their presence had been a balm to his restless soul. Now, he was alone again, the weight of his promise pressing heavily on him. With a deep breath, Jonas stood and looked toward the horizon. The faint light of dawn painted the landscape in soft hues of gold and pink. Somewhere out there, Margot was waiting. As Jonas moved through the remnants of Aldridge, he felt the village slowly beginning to stir. The oppressive energy that had choked the streets was gone, replaced by a faint hum of life. Ghostly figures began to appear, their forms hesitant and uncertain. One of the spirits, an older woman with kind eyes, approached Jonas. Did you do this? She asked, her voice filled with wonder. Jonas nodded. Revenant is gone. You're free now. The woman's face broke into a smile, and she reached out as if to touch his hand. Thank you. We've been trapped here for so long. I thought we'd never escape. Jonas stepped back, his expression serious. You need to move on. Don't linger here any longer than you have to. The woman hesitated, then nodded. What about you? Jonas looked toward the horizon, his gaze distant. I still have something to finish. The woman gave him a grateful smile before fading into the light, joining the other spirits that had begun to ascend. Jonas watched them go, his resolve hardening. The journey to find Margot was both physical and emotional. Jonas retraced his steps through the ruins of Aldridge, following faint memories and fleeting glimpses of the past. Each step brought him closer to the truth, but it also brought new challenges. The village itself seemed to resist him at times. Shadows lingered in corners, remnants of Revenant's influence. Jonas had to stay vigilant, his energy stretched thin as he pushed forward. But as the hours passed, he began to sense her. A faint, familiar presence that tugged at his very being. Margot, he whispered, his voice filled with longing. Finally, he reached the heart of the village, a crumbling garden overgrown with ivy and wildflowers. In the center stood a statue, weathered by time but still recognizable. It was Margot. Jonas approached the statue, his heart pounding. "Margot," he called softly. The air around him shimmered, and a faint figure began to materialize. Margot's ghostly form appeared before him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Jonas," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jonas felt a surge of relief and anguish all at once. "Margot. I found you." She reached out, her hand passing through his. "I thought I'd never see you again. I waited so long." Tears streamed down Jonas's face, his form flickering with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Margot. I should have been there for you. I should have protected you." Margot shook her head, her expression softening. "You don't have to apologize. None of this was your fault." Jonas took a shaky breath, the weight of his guilt lifting slightly. "I promised I'd find you. And now? I just want to make things right." Margot smiled, her form glowing faintly. "You already have. Just by being here." The light around them grew brighter, enveloping them both. Jonas felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of peace and closure washing over him. As the light intensified, Margot took his hand. "It's time for both of us to move on, Jonas. Together." Jonas looked at her, his heart full. Together. And as the light carried them away, the ruins of Oldridge finally fell silent, the echoes of the past fading into peace. The light surrounding Jonas and Margot faded, leaving them standing on a vast, endless field of golden grass. The air was still, warm, and suffused with a sense of peace that Jonas had almost forgotten could exist. Overhead, the sky shimmered with hues of orange and lavender, as if it too was part of their journey's conclusion. Jonas turned to Margot, her ghostly form now solid and vibrant. She no longer carried the weariness he had seen in her before. Her eyes sparkled with life, and her presence radiated warmth. "Where are we?" Jonas asked, his voice soft with wonder. Margot smiled, brushing her hand lightly against his arm. This time, it didn't pass through him. Instead, he felt her touch, a gentle, reassuring warmth. "This is the between," she said. "A place where souls find their peace before moving on." Jonas looked around, the beauty of the place filling him with awe. "So, this is it? The end?" Margot shook her head, her smile bittersweet. "Not the end, Jonas. The beginning of something new." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their journey settling over them. Jonas felt a sense of calm, but also a pang of regret. "I spent so many years trapped in Oldridge, consumed by guilt and anger. I didn't think I'd ever find peace." Margot turned to him, her expression soft. "You found it because you never gave up. You fought for what mattered, to free the village, to keep your promise. That's what brought us here." Jonas felt his chest tighten. "I just wish I could have saved you back then. That I could have done more." Margot reached up, her fingers gently tracing the edge of his face. "You saved me now, Jonas. And you saved yourself. That's what matters." As they walked through the golden field, memories of their life together began to surface. Jonas saw flashes of their small cottage in Oldridge, the way Margot would hum as she cooked, the sound of their laughter echoing through the walls. "Do you remember the day we planted that rose bush in front of the cottage?" Margot asked, her eyes twinkling. Jonas chuckled, the memory warming him. "How could I forget? You insisted on planting it in the middle of a storm. I thought you were mad. And yet, it bloomed," Margot said, her smile widening. "Even in the worst weather, it grew stronger." Jonas nodded, the metaphor not lost on him. "Just like us." As they continued walking, a faint glow appeared on the horizon. It grew brighter with each step, beckoning them forward. Jonas felt a mix of anticipation and hesitation. "This is it, isn't it?" he asked, his voice trembling. Margot nodded, her hand tightening around his. "Yes. It's time to move on." Jonas stopped, his feet rooted to the ground. But what happens when we cross? Will we still be together? Margot turned to him, her gaze steady. I don't know, Jonas. But whatever's waiting for us, we'll face it together. That's what we've always done. Jonas looked into her eyes, the love and trust he saw there giving him the strength he needed. You're right. Together. As they stepped into the light, the world around them shifted. The golden field dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors, each hue carrying a sense of warmth and joy. Jonas felt a weight lifting from him, the burden of his past finally slipping away. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. When the light faded, Jonas and Margot found themselves standing on the shores of a tranquil lake. The water was crystal clear, reflecting a sky filled with stars that seemed impossibly close. Jonas took a deep breath, the air crisp and invigorating. Is this heaven? Margot laughed softly. Maybe. Or maybe it's just the next step. As they stood there, a small rowboat appeared on the shore, its oars glinting in the starlight. Jonas turned to Margot, his heart swelling with gratitude. Whatever's ahead, I'm ready, he said. Margot smiled, her hand finding his. Then let's go. They stepped into the boat, their movements perfectly in sync. As they rowed across the lake, the stars above seemed to shift, forming constellations that told stories of love, loss, and redemption. Jonas felt a sense of closure washing over him. He had kept his promise to Margot, freed the village from its torment, and found peace for himself. More than that, he had learned something profound, that even in the darkest of times, love and hope could light the way forward. As they reached the center of the lake, a soft glow began to emanate from the water. It surrounded the boat, wrapping them in its warmth. Jonas looked at Margot, his heart full. Thank you, he said, his voice breaking. For everything. Margot leaned in, her forehead resting against his. Thank you, Jonas. For never giving up on me. The glow grew brighter, and Jonas felt a sense of weightlessness. He closed his eyes, letting the light carry him forward. When he opened them again, he was standing in a familiar place, the small garden in front of their cottage. The rose bush was in full bloom, its petals vibrant and fragrant. Margot stood beside him, her hand in his. We're home, she said, her voice filled with wonder. Jonas nodded, a smile spreading across his face. We are. Jonas's journey teaches that redemption and peace are always within reach, no matter how far one has fallen. By facing his fears, confronting his past, and staying true to his promises, Jonas not only freed himself from the chains of guilt but also discovered the enduring power of love and hope. In the end, his story is a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, the human, and ghostly, spirit has the strength to heal, grow, and find its way home.